Ghislaine is guilty. COVID closures across the country are spreading. And why is NASA hiring dozens of priests? Thursday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning, everybody. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for the penultimate day of 2021, possibly of our lives. This is December 30th. I am Carlo Versano, and I am here in the cut with Baker Machado. Baker, what's up?
Good to see you, Carlo Versano, on this National Bacon Day. And yes, you're right. The countdown officially begins tomorrow at midnight. Maybe a new year, maybe a new life, maybe, new fortunes for all of us as we potentially start a new year. But who knows? Given all the influx of news that we've been getting, who knows if this is basically the end of it?
Well, on that note, I have an important announcement. So I hope everybody is sitting down because this may come to a shock to some of you. But I'm leaving Cheddar, and this podcast is going to be on hiatus in the new year. I'll have a little bit more to say tomorrow. On our last pod of the year, but I didn't want to drop that on everybody with no notice on New Year's Eve. But just in brief, I was really quite literally made an offer I couldn't refuse, and I took it. So I'm obviously very torn about leaving this podcast and everything we've built here. But the intention is for the pod to start back up and be nice and fresh when Jill returns in the coming weeks. But that said, Baker, this is it for you and me, at least for right now.
Carlo, well, first off, congratulations. I know I speak for the entire Need to Know family that we're so excited for you and your family and all the new adventures that you have on the horizon with this new position. It has been a great moment in my career to be able to, be a part of this amazing project that you and Jill have been able to create for the Need to Know podcast. The listeners, I know the fans who listen to this thing disagree with you on 90% of the things that you say, but email saying how much this podcast is such an important part of their day. Just being able to play a small part in what you and Jill have been able to create has been incredible. And I know I speak for all of the listeners and all of the fans of this podcast in saying that we will miss your charming optimism on everything that you talk about in the mornings, your dry wit, your humor, but just all those things that make you wonderful and unique, Carlo. And I know we're going to really miss you, but we're really excited for you.
I appreciate that, Baker. I'll still be around, and you guys will still be able to find me. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about all that tomorrow. But with that said, Baker, people want to hear the news, so let's get to it.
Yes, they do. So let's dive into the big one coming yesterday afternoon, Carlo. Ghislaine Maxwell has been convicted of sex trafficking for facilitating the abuse of underage girls at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. Then after a months-long trial, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on 5 of 6 counts against her. She was acquitted on the charge of enticing a minor to travel across state lines for sex. That, by the way, was probably one of the more difficult of the charges there anyway. Mm-hmm. Now, Maxwell does face up to 40 years in prison for just the most serious counts here. Her defense team does say, though, she plans to appeal, though she's also facing another trial in the same court, this on perjury charges that could add more to her sentence. But basically, the point here, Carlo, Ghislaine Maxwell, almost certainly, barring any unforeseen sort of circumstances here in terms of her sentencing, likely going to spend the rest of her life in jail. She, of course, in her 60s right now. But in many ways, because Jeffrey Epstein no longer with us and wasn't able to basically face the charges for what he was being accused of, she was sort of seen basically as this moment for the accusers to get sort of their due justice against what they had gone through during the Jeffrey Epstein days.
Yeah, this was the proxy trial that they couldn't have because Jeffrey Epstein is dead or, sipping a Mai Tai on some island out there. Who the hell knows, right? But look, let this be a lesson. Let this be a lesson to other convicted pedophiles out there. The United States government is going to come down like a ton of bricks on the woman that you hire to do your logistics and paperwork. But yeah, just a rough day for all the other high-profile, powerful people who cavorted with Ghislaine Maxwell over the years, despite the more or less open secret that she was on the payroll of Jeffrey Epstein, who again was a convicted pedophile. So while I think this is some measure of justice in sort of this whole sordid affair, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see any justice for any of the men who actually abused these girls. That said, I think the one thing that I'll be interested to keep an eye on in this is there a possibility that she sings, right? Could she talk and start naming names in exchange for a reduced sentence? Is there a chance of that? I don't know. Or would, she potentially be taken out before that could happen? I don't know.
No, look, because you would have to think Prince Andrew, the Clintons, the Trumps, any person that basically had some sort of relationship with Epstein, obviously, could potentially be, listed by her if she does sing. But Carlo, the other thing that's interesting here is the interest in this trial because of documentaries, the internet, everything about Jeffrey Epstein. This all really also started because of local journalism. The Miami Herald,
Julie K. Brown,
reporting. Yeah, her incredible reporting, that she did for years and years and years, sometimes not getting paid anything to basically get it done. This is basically the climax of why the world needs good reporters and the world needs the news media, because if it weren't for Julie K. Brown, Ghislaine Maxwell would not be in a courtroom like she was yesterday.
No, it's absolutely true. And I did see yesterday that Maxwell, before she was sort of carted off after the sentencing, or after the guilty verdict, rather, she was speaking to an ABC News reporter in the courtroom. So I think there is a possibility that she may do an interview.
Interesting.
And we'll have to keep an eye on that. That will be probably the interview of the year, at least for me.
Oh, absolutely. Me as well. Meanwhile, Carlo, let's switch gears and talk COVID. Places that are seeing a crush of new COVID cases just struggling now to stay open and function. That is, the virus is whipping through workforces. The Smithsonian in D.C. is temporarily closing 4 museums through the holiday weekend, which is usually a pretty busy time in D.C., that in order to relocate staff to other museums. Meanwhile, in New York City, the MTA is adjusting to crew shortages by running fewer subways and buses, and that's leading to longer wait times for passengers. Big banks also temporarily closing hundreds of their branches across the country, and restaurants in cities from Milwaukee to Dallas are being forced to shut down during a very lucrative holiday weekend. Just yesterday, Carlo, as we continue to look at the new case numbers, it's sort of insane, the amount of new cases that we're getting. 301,000 new cases on average yesterday. That, according to the New York Times, that is up 153% over the course of the last 2 weeks. But as I continue to say over and over again, and it's almost kind of shocking how this number has not even moved, the death cases continue to stay flat. We're still averaging only 1,200 deaths. Hospitalizations, interestingly enough, not being overwhelmed just yet either. Hospitalizations only up 11% over the last 2 weeks.
Well, and obviously these case numbers are a severe undercount, right? Because these are just reflections of positive tests, and a lot of people, especially because this variant appears to be so mild or even asymptomatic in a lot of cases. A lot of people aren't getting tested. A lot of people have COVID right now and they don't even know they have COVID. That's what's causing.
Exactly.
It's not, the reason why this thing is spreading like crazy isn't because people are like not following the CDC's guidelines and leaving their house after 5 days rather than 10. It's because there's people out there who don't know that they're infected and they're spreading it. That's the reason why these case numbers are just absolutely through the roof. Am I going to Turks and Caicos next week? Can somebody just tell me?
No.
Should I go or not? Somebody just tell me.
Yes, yes. By the way, you should, unless, of course, your new job is upset that you're basically stuck in another country for the first couple weeks.
I'm a little bit worried about that. The only thing I really worry about is you have to throw a negative test to get back into the United States.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit worried that we're gonna get sick there, not even sick, but even just like infected there, and then we won't be able to come back. But anyway, just back to some of these closures. Look, you can't keep closing down society with like lockdowns or whatever. So you're gonna see more of these sort of like piecemeal closures in businesses. But I think that there is this sense out there, especially among wage workers, people who are, sort of like part of the service economy, that they are essentially being sacrificed, to the altar of the American consumer economy, which is true, by the way. They are, right? I mean, that's the world that we live in. That's the world that we've created for ourselves over the last several decades. Everything depends on us buying and consuming to keep the wheels in motion. That's what we've learned over COVID, right? One of the big realizations that I think a lot of people have had over the last couple years is that there's nobody coming to help, right? The government is basically feckless. You're essentially on your own here. Sure, like, the federal government, whether it's Trump or Biden, they'll send you some cash to keep your, to keep yourself from like completely going under. But it's not like they're sending that money out of the goodness of their hearts, right? It was sent, these stimulus checks and these other, financial sort of incentives that were given out over the pandemic. That was to keep us spending, because the spending is the lubrication that keeps the gears moving, right? That's the whole thing here. And I really do believe, right, and I really do believe that, a lot of the kind of like antisocial and reckless behavior that we've seen out there, everything from, record homicides in basically every major city in America, to some of the riots, to people driving like maniacs, as we've talked about on this pod many times, to airline passengers fistfighting each other over masks. It all goes back to that sense, the sense that the pandemic, combined with sort of like the failure of all of our institutions in the Trump era, just kind of exposed the shortcomings of the society that we live in, and how perilously it all hangs on this knife's edge. If you realize that your government doesn't really give a shit if you die of a deadly virus, and they don't really have any plans or ability to actually stop it, why not smash that Louis Vuitton window and steal a nice purse for your girlfriend, right? Why not get high on opioids that'll make you feel a little bit better? Why not run that red light? Who's going to stop you? Does that?
Again, I just want to stress to our viewers, we're not recommending you do any of those things.
No, don't do any of those things, of course. But I think that there's a through line. I think there's a through line between the pandemic and all of these other things that are happening. And I think that we haven't really come to terms with what exactly that means. But I don't think I think it's all connected.
So I think the testing component in all of this is going to be interesting, Carlo, because we've seen that there's not a great supply of these rapid tests, which everybody's sort of now taking to sort of realize that they're going to be able to have any sort of life anymore. I think technology now is going to be ripe for disruption when it comes to the testing part. You're going to see companies develop apps, testing services where you're basically buying tests in bulk every month. There was a company I interviewed on Cheddar News just a week or so ago that is basically trying to get you a rapid test in the next 10 minutes, and there's an app especially on your phone. I think that's where we're going now, because corporations now are because CDC has brought down the isolation guidelines, and they're realizing that people are not, if they're boosted and vaccinated, are not going to the hospital if they're catching COVID. I think we're now entering this new phase where companies now are going to be a little bit more lax when it comes to if one of their employees is tested positive, they're not going to shut down the office like they had in the past. And if there's sort of more companies doing these sort of rapid tests and they're making it easier for more people to test themselves, I think the next couple of years or so, we're just going to be rapid testing ourselves every week or every other day or so. And the world sort of tries to get back to normalcy as a result of that. And we sort of deal
which is what we should
with
be
COVID.
doing. That's what we should be doing. This is all part of this thing getting into this endemic stage, and it's going to be very bumpy because none of us who are alive now have ever dealt with that before.
Yeah, good point. Meanwhile, let's talk some international news here, Carlo. What's happening between Russia and Ukraine? One of the big potential conflicts to watch next year, as President Biden is scheduled to hold a call today with Vladimir Putin. That is their second they've had just this month. That amid ongoing tensions on Ukraine's eastern border. That's where Russia has been amassing troops ahead of what some believe to be a planned invasion planned for early next year, although we should note Russia has continuously denied, saying that they have any sort of invasion plan that they're going to do with Ukraine. But this is also setting the stage for more talks between officials in January as well. And the New York Times and the the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal both reporting this call that's happening today was actually instituted by Russian officials, including Vladimir Putin. They wanted to get Joe Biden on the phone today.
Yeah, and Putin has been withdrawing some of those troops. I believe about 10,000 of those troops have been sent back into Russia from the Ukrainian border in the last week. But the belief is from U.S. intelligence that there's something like 70, potentially even 100,000 on the border. So it's really just like a small chunk that he's recalling. Look, if you're Putin and you have your eyes on Ukraine, now is the time to move, right? The entire West is in disarray over COVID. No one's really going to stop you from making your move now. Plus, Europe, which you would hope in this situation would be more forcefully able to prevent this from happening. They need all that Russian gas this winter, so they can't even really do anything if this goes down. So look, if and when I think that this invasion happens early next year, potentially maybe in the spring when it gets a little bit warmer, I think that this is going to be a huge black eye for NATO, for one thing, right? NATO is supposed to exist to deter this kind of thing from happening. But we really have just hung Ukraine out to dry for years. I mean, we've told them they can't join us, but we're also not going to support them in any real way against Russia, Russian aggression, as we saw in 2014 when, Putin went into Crimea and all we did was say like, hey, don't do that.
Don't
Vlad.
do that.
And he would, yeah. So, I mean, look, Trump was actually right in his intuition. I think that NATO has become, a little long in the tooth, but that's a debate for another time, I guess.
Look, this all stems from Georgia and the Republic of Georgia and Ukraine wanting to join NATO. I'm almost curious if this does accelerate them joining. Or Biden at least indicates there's more of an interest in accelerating them joining to basically try to deter Vladimir Putin. But either way, interesting that Vladimir Putin was the one that instituted this phone call, not the other way around here. Yeah. Let's switch gears and talk business here. It was a record year for IPOs, but many of the stocks that took off in the public debuts this last year have now come crashing right back down to earth in the waning days of 2021. Nearly 2 out of 3 companies that went public this year are now trading below their IPO prices. That is, investors are losing appetite for high growth stocks now that higher interest rates are now on the horizon, Carlos. So it's pretty interesting. A lot of the companies that we saw this last year, even companies we didn't expect that would go public, like BuzzFeed in particular, completely different story after they went public.
Yeah, some of the more highly anticipated big offerings from companies like Robinhood, Oatly, the oat milk maker, Bumble, the dating app. Each one of those stocks down more than 50% from their opening price, which is really amazing when you think about it. Coming, of course, is the broader market notching record highs to close out the year. So this it was a banner year for IPOs. And just in terms of next year, I don't think it's probably going to be nearly as big. Some of the big ones to look out for, though, Stripe, which is one of those credit card processing services, Instacart, and Discord. There was a great story in the New York Times the other day about Discord and how it sort of rose from this sort of like, basically like a chat room for gamers into one of these communications platforms that really just took off like wildfire during the pandemic and has now really broadened itself to be, useful to more people than just gaming enthusiasts. I thought that was a really good piece.
Yeah, and another one, by the way, Impossible Foods also looking potentially at going public next year as well. That after we saw Beyond Meat go public a few years ago.
Those companies have been – I feel like those companies have been a little bit not what we – I was expecting that those fake meat companies were really going to be the next big thing, but it doesn't seem like they've caught on that much. Have they? I don't know.
I feel like the conversation has changed, which and I don't mean that as a negative thing, unless that's more that these faux plant-based meats have sort of acclimated themselves into our lives more that we're talking about them less. But when Beyond Meat went public, all we were talking about was, is this the start of all of us having more of these plant-based meats or these fake meats? And are you going to see them rolled out into more things? I think because of the pandemic, we haven't talked about that as much. And so we'll kind of see if the appetite is still there. If Impossible Foods decides to go public next year, will they have as much of a demand as Beyond Meat, even though Impossible has just as many corporate partnerships as Beyond Meat does as well?
I mean, you see these things in the grocery store, so people must be buying them. But I think one of the problems is they're too expensive, right? They're not at the level of like it's more expensive to buy a Beyond Meat burger than it is to just buy a beef patty.
It's the cost, but also calorically, calorically, I mean, yes, you're not eating meat, but like calorically, it's not like it's any healthier for you because it's still the same amount of calories and sodium and all that other stuff that you're normally having with a burger. One other area that is ripe for disruption is the autonomous trucking industry. A self-driving truck company says they have now completed the very first ever fully autonomous trip of a tractor trailer on open public roads. True Simple announced that a semi-truck powering its self-driving technology drove an 80-mile route on an Arizona highway with no humans on board of it. The milestone comes amid a resurgence of interest in self-driving trucks, which many experts believe are closer to becoming a reality than self-driving cars. If you talk to people in the trucking industry, yes, while they're sad, the amount of new drivers that are interested in becoming truck drivers has continued to fall year after year after year after year. Just because I think a lot of younger people are interested in other sorts of industries rather than the trucking industry. If one thing could keep the trucking industry alive and afloat, it's autonomous driving, because you basically combat the loss of all the drivers that you don't have. On top of that, you're not basically reliant on taking breaks, all these other sorts of things that you had to do when these truck drivers were making these long routes, because you're having an autonomous car doing all the work for you.
Yeah, at least for like the hard, trucking is obviously one of like the hardest jobs there is, right? You have to, I mean, to be in a, to be in a moving vehicle for that long. But one of the reasons why the belief is now that self-driving trucks are closer than cars, as we just saw with this milestone from Too Simple, is that, trucks basically drive in a straight line, right? For most of their, most of their journey. They don't have to do a bunch of the maneuvering that a car has to do on like an urban road, right? They don't really have to worry about pedestrians. They don't really have to worry about traffic lights and other, things of that nature. So I think that's the belief, is that that's why this technology could be coming there sooner than it is, into passenger vehicles. And just this prolonged shortage of truck drivers that you just talked about, making this even more attractive. That said, Too Simple, I just looked at their stock. They've been an absolute dud since they IPO'd in April. So who knows?
Interesting. Something to definitely watch next year, especially as this becomes more a reality, especially autonomous driving. Meanwhile, this is a fascinating story, Carlo. NASA reportedly hired 24 theologians and religious experts to contemplate what would happen if humans discovered alien life in the cosmos. According to an Anglican priest in the UK who says he was part of the project several years ago, NASA wanted to understand how news of alien life would impact religious people's belief systems. Dr. Andrew Davidson said in an interview that he and his fellow theologians, including a rabbi, an imam, and another priest, which, by the way, that sounds like a joke already, agreed that the major religions would be able to take this discovery of alien life, quote unquote, in stride, which I think is pretty interesting here.
A rabbi, a priest, and an imam walk into a NASA study. Is that the?
See, is that the setup? Joke perfectly.
Yeah. It's always funny to me what news breaks through, because I have a great sort of view into this because of Becky's family being in Romania, and her mom called her yesterday because she read a version of this story that had sort of made it through into Romanian media, and she took it to mean that NASA was preparing to announce that they've discovered alien life, and she wanted to make sure that Becky was aware of it, and that basically we could all get our
handle it.
Yeah, just so we could get our affairs in order, I guess. I just thought it was so interesting. What breaks through or not, right? But hey, look, I mean, it's an interesting study, and obviously, if and when we do find alien life, that's going to be a major religious people in particular. That's going to be really something to grapple with.
Absolutely, good point.
All right, let's do a little more to know before we go, Baker.
All right, we've been talking about the weather all week. The Pacific Northwest set for its coldest New Year's in a very long time. Snow and frigid air battering cities like Seattle and Portland and the mountains of Northern California, all helping to ease drought conditions, while the rest of the country hasn't seen much in the way of snowfall so far this season. But we should also say other parts of the country seeing insane temperatures as well, in terms of incredibly high temperatures.
Yeah, we mentioned yesterday it was 67 in Alaska. Now it's going to go down to below freezing. So they are really worried about the ice situation out there. Meantime, going back overseas here, Israel trying to contain a severe outbreak of avian flu after that virus wiped out about 5,000 migratory cranes that were being held in a popular nature reserve in Israel. There have not been any reports of this avian flu jumping from the birds to humans. But of course, that is something that we all know now can happen. So it's something to keep an eye on. I can't deal with another, pathogen. So someone
No,
figure this out.
yeah, yes, yeah, amen. Meanwhile, New York City set to become the biggest city, Carlo, in the country to mandate employers list their salary ranges for jobs that are posted online. Almost any company that has jobs posted in the city will have to list minimum and maximum salaries for every open position. Transparency that I think a lot of people have been asking for jobs for decades here, finally coming to fruition.
Yeah, this is going to be a big trend to watch in the new year: pay transparency, and I think this is a good thing because if you're in the job market, it's always such a crapshoot, right? Because you're like, I'm going through these interviewing process that takes forever, and like I don't even know what this job pays, right? For all I know,
you're in the dark.
Yeah, you're totally in the dark. And then they ask you what your salary is, and you're like, should I lie? So, but like
Right.
you can't lie to them. The whole thing is it's just a really bad system. Okay, well, no winner in the Powerball drawing last night. That bumps the jackpot up to a cool $483 million for the next drawing that will be on New Year's Day, making it among one of the biggest pots of the year. Baker, are you taking the annuity?
I'm taking the annuity. Look, I'm taking the Bobby Bonilla approach. Get paid, your millions of dollars every year for the rest of your life. But if you do take the lump sum, over about $350 million if you take the lump sum, Carlo. So that's not too bad either in case you need to spend it really fast.
I'm an annuity man. I'm taking that. That weekly paycheck.
Yeah, I think the stress of knowing you have a paycheck for the rest of your life is pretty amazing.
Yes, exactly.
Meanwhile, a decade after they announced they were splitting up, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria Shriver have finally finalized their divorce. The power couple split all the way back in 2011, that after Arnold acknowledged that he had fathered a child with his family's housekeeper, but they've remained amicable, attending events together with their grown children over the ensuing years. Terms of the divorce were not made public. It's sort of interesting. There was this piece in the New York Times, months ago, about sort of the rise of the popularity of Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was incredibly popular when he first went into office during the recall election. His poll numbers fell dramatically. The news of this affair and that this other child that he had came towards the tail end of his time as governor. He got divorced, and then he sort of rehabbed his image back in California. And I believe the New York Times or the LA Times polled Californians, and apparently Arnold Schwarzenegger is still to this day one of the more popular politicians in a very blue state like California.
Really remarkable. He sort of pulled off the Trump thing before Trump did, right?
He did.
Yeah. Okay, and finally, Clash of the Titans in Hollywood here. The Rock not coming back to the Fast and Furious franchise, no matter how much Vin Diesel wants him to. Dwayne Johnson opening up in a year-end interview to CNN about his public feud with Vin Diesel. Diesel, of course, recently pleaded with Johnson in an Instagram post to return to the Fast and the Furious fold. Johnson called that an example of Diesel's, quote, manipulation, and said there's, quote, no chance he's going to make another Fast movie. Baker, I hate when the meatheads fight.
Look, there's so many Fast and Furious movies. They continue to bring in tons and tons of money at the box office. Does this movie have legs still to bring in more money if The Rock is not part of the franchise? That's going to be the big question.
Okay, guys, that's what you need to know for Thursday, December 30th. Baker, my friend, my partner, my buddy, I will miss you, man, but we'll be in touch.
I will miss you.
And we'll talk. I'll talk a little bit more to you guys tomorrow on our last day of the year. All right, guys.